Hello, this is Goku 4071, and I've been thinking about doing this for a while, but I was kind of afraid to do this, and then I realized that I tell so many people my stories, the ideas that I'm writing, that any one of them could try to steal my idea, and even though putting it on YouTube gives a lot more people the ability to steal it, it doesn't matter. I'm not doing anything right now with it. And I'd rather get ideas, and like when I ask my friends, they help me and they make them better, and getting it online with people who actually are into this stuff might actually really make my ideas much better, because people, hopefully you will comment and tell me what you think. So this is my idea for a comic, for my comic universe, kind of like Marvel and DC, where there's a lot of superheroes and there's an entire universe. Now I'm only going to name the main team, my version of the JLA, and the main villains. Now let's start out with the team. Okay, my team is going to consist, my version of the JLA consists of 6 prime members. This is the original 6. Obviously, if it ever becomes real, and if it ever becomes successful, I plan to introduce other characters after the fact, and then add, take away, remove, you know, what they usually do in comic books. But the first member is named Sia. Now he is the speedster of the team. He is the original member. He is the first member. He's the one that actually gets everyone together. But he's not the leader. He doesn't really think he can be a leader. But the character, his origin is that he was an Olympic runner, and he had ran, and basically he was going for his 3rd gold medal, and then he ended up, because of another runner sabotaging it, he ended up shattering both of his kneecaps, being able to not run anymore. And a friend of his, who is a scientist, was experimenting with, was doing experimentation that that basically led to getting his legs repaired, because there was nothing he could do through modern medicine. So he did it, and instead of just repairing his kneecaps and being able to run again, he ended up learning that he could go upwards of Mach 2, normally about Mach 1, but if he really tries to, if he can sprint about Mach 2. And when he eventually gets his powers, he's still a very competitive person. That's his nature, that's his drive. So he doesn't initially try to become a hero. Initially he ends up becoming initially what he ends up doing is he ends up going to a museum, and he runs out, steals a painting, runs to the police station, and gives it to him, because he's not a thief, but inherently he wants challenges, and that's who he is. And another hero, which is not going to be on this list, ends up stopping him, and understands he has a good heart, and stops him with his own power. By making him run so fast, and because his power doesn't give him like a shield or anything, he just gets the ability to run fast. He can't breathe, and he ends up getting knocked out. And soon after that, she constructs a flight suit, very reminiscent flight suit, so that won't happen again. So he gets the right amount of oxygen, and so that his body can withstand the speeds that he's going at. And then his main story is that in the comic book, in his standalone comic book, he will be, his story is that he goes to his best friend, says, "I'm going to become a competitive runner again," and then his best friend ends up dying while he's in the room, and everyone thinks he did it, and he didn't do it. And so he's on the run, and even though he saves people that he can, but he's trying to run away from the cops and not trying to hurt anybody. The next character on the list, the next hero, the next one that's recruited, is named RPG. Now the idea came is I was thinking about powers. What would be an interesting power? If you could have any power, what would it be? And the idea of somebody having the power of D&D really came awesome. So the character came that he is Mr. D&D. He has basically I don't know if I'm actually going to use the game D&D if I ever write this, but basically he is the master at a tabletop RPG, something very similar to D&D, and he is the best. He can make any character, he can do anything, and so one day he ends up finding a book at a garage sale of the RPG tabletop game he plays, and it's a book he doesn't own. It's a different language, so he's so excited. And they don't realize how expensive a book like that would cost. So he ends up getting it for a steal, and he brings it home, and he starts to try to read the book. And he ends up finding a way how to read the book. He ends up spending enough time to learn enough to read the book. And when he reads the book, he ends up getting teleported into a fantasy world. And his standalone comic is going to essentially be him learning actually how to do the stuff that he's going to do in the comic. And it's going to be kind of like a fantasy comic where he goes around and he gets team, and yeah, it's going to be like a D&D comic type thing. And then in the superhero team up type of thing, he's out. Basically, he's been trapped in that world for 10 years, and this is what he has learned and his powers. And basically his power scheme is he has all the basic magical powers that you would expect from a D&D character. He can summon, he can heal, and he can do offensive attacks like fireballs. He also wields a sword, and and he also wields a bow. So basically he's just your very generic jack of all trades D&D type character. He also wears chainmail and a cloak. I think I'm gonna go with the red-black and his costume. I'm not really sure color-wise on all these characters' costumes. Hopefully when I get an artist, this is my biggest problem, is that I'm a writer, I'm not an artist. So hopefully when I get an artist, he'll have some suggestions on color schemes on some of these characters. Yeah, so the next character on the list is called Watershot. Watershot has the power of telekinesis, but he doesn't just have generic, I can move things with my mind. He can control H2O to a degree that he can control it on any level, and to the degree that he can actually take oxygen, the air that we breathe, and actually turn it into H2O. So he can. So if he's not in an area with lack of oxygen, like if there's a fire, his power can work. And so his power, he gets weakened by fire, but so basically he can turn water into ice, he can turn ice into steam, and yeah. And so his story is that his father was working for the big bad, the businessman. I'll get to his story later. And so what happened is that his son ended up finding out that they were spiking the water. His father worked for a water purification company, and that they were making addictive water. And I'm pretty sure there's a law against that. I'm not exactly sure, but I'm pretty sure that's something they would frown upon. So he ends up hiring one of the employees at the company, ends up asking to throw into the water. Because of what they were using, the chemicals ended up interacting weird with his body, giving him these superpowers. And so his story is actually, he starts out as a villain for Sia, where he's trying to kill his father, and Sia teaches him what he did wrong, and then later on when Sia builds the team, he ends up joining the team. Next is the fourth member, and that is Titan. Now, Titan's story is that Titan was basically, yet again, the name I'm going to bring up several times here, the businessman, was experimenting with birth to try to make super kids, because he does a lot of experimentation. And I'll get to his story and who he is. He'll definitely be in this video. But so two of his employees end up allowing them to do this to their unborn child, and ends up coming out to be a freak. Now they don't really figure out that he has powers yet, And so they ask the businessman to get rid of the child. So he ends up taking him to the Bermuda Triangle. And in this world, the Bermuda Triangle is basically a patch of land that has been shrouded, that basically gravity is so heavy that if boats go there, they end up sinking. And so the businessman knows how to get through that, and ends up putting this kid on there. And this island, for some miraculous reason, has been trapped in Greek times. So they still believe in the Greek gods, and there's like deformed creatures, and they all think that this is basically that they're basically in Greece and that the gods exist. And Titan, when he grows up, ends up being this like 9-foot gigantic guy, and they think he's a Titan, even though he's not huge. To them, they would probably think he's a Titan, and he's massively strong, and he's just bulky, and he's huge. And so he ends up getting off the island and seeks out his parents. And for some reason or another, ends up finding out what he was doing was wrong. Not with the help of any particular outside forces, but then he ends up, and then on basically Sia gets a list of possible heroes, and he's on his list, and Sia comes to see him, and he joins the team. Now, the 5th member on the list is probably the most controversial, because it's an animal. Yes, there's one animal. I was thinking of really cool powers, and one always came up to me is a super brain. And I like the idea of Beast, where he's a beast, but he's also the opposite of a beast. He's an intellect. And so that idea came up with the next character, Kit Kat. So Kit Kat was a stray dog. He was a vegetarian stray dog. Yes, he was not a vegetarian at this time. He didn't know meat was animals, but he didn't hurt animals. He didn't kill any animal. And so he ended up getting kidnapped by some dog catchers, and yet again, the businessman was experimenting on animals, because for some reason he was trying to experiment with trying to make things smarter, and for some reason it wasn't working on humans. The brains were way too complex, and with animals, he started to experiment, and it worked on Kit Kat. But Kit Kat used his intelligent brain to escape. He has a super brain. His intellect is like 280, but he also has weak telekinesis. He can move things that you and me could pick up with our hands. Like, he can move light objects, so he's able to build stuff. Now, the final character on the list, and essentially that's Kit Kat's story. He ends up becoming a member, and he's the smart one, and he's a pacifist. Now, the next member on the list, the final team member, the 6th one, is what I have right now is and this is subject to change. Right, what I have right now, I don't have a name for her yet, but a young woman who ends up a young Japanese woman who ends up getting raped and her eyes gouged out. She doesn't get killed, and so because of what happened to her, she ends up getting trained in martial arts and learning to become an expert at martial arts to try to and then she ends up becoming a vigilante. And through some turn of event, like her main comment, her being a vigilante, and that eventually she'll join the team, and obviously they don't kill, so she'll have to stop killing. But yeah, I don't know if she will. I don't know. Like, yeah, I kind of have her being a killer because of the fact of that she had a traumatic event, but I don't know, this is a character I'm still working on. I don't quite have her in place. Now let's get to the villains. You gotta have villains if you have heroes, right? So I have villains. Most of the villains are gonna be Sia's villains, but he has the generic villains. He has the villains that work for everybody. Now the main villain of the universe is the businessman. I was talking to him about earlier. Now, essentially, I have an origin for him, but you're not going to hear the origin. because in the comic, his history is supposed to be shrouded in mystery, and you're not supposed to know where this guy came from. All you're supposed to know is that he's insanely rich and he's insanely powerful. One thing that you will know very early on is that a 15-year-old boy, basically you'll know that he's quite old, because a 15-year-old boy who now is a man in his 80s was once a pupil of his, and that 15-year-old boy ended up becoming a billionaire, ended up becoming a member of the Gentleman's Club, which the Gentleman's Club, I'll get to that in a minute. That's one of Businessman's main villains. But the businessman is an insanely rich guy who's seeking the cure for oldness. He's seeking the cure for everlasting life. He has two things that he cares about: wealth and living forever. And so he started to do laboratory experiments to figure this out. And essentially he has gained this empire that is so powerful and so vasting, and he has hundreds of supervillains at his disposal, and he has trillions of dollars at his disposal. And so essentially he initially tries to buy Sia off because he doesn't want to fight these guys. He'd rather pay them and get them to be his employees and fight them, because he doesn't have any interest in fighting them. If they'll do what he says, he doesn't care if they fight crime. He doesn't care about petty crime. He just doesn't want his crimes to be stopped. One of his major villains, the Gentleman's Club, which is more of an ally to our heroes at first, is basically a group of billionaires that want to become the businessman, but they have $200 billion in net worth together, where the businessman has trillions of dollars, and they need a superhero team to go up against him. So they have basically nothing against a guy who has everything. And when I mean everything, I mean $2 billion to a guy who has trillions is nothing. It's petty change. And this guy has hundreds of superheroes, and they have a team of 6. So, yeah. Other villains is, I have a flame guy. He's basically what he was, I don't know his name yet. If you have any good ideas for names, please leave a comment below. But essentially, he was a magician who specialized in fiery tricks. So, he did all these fiery, awesome magic tricks. But he was also an arsonist. And the businessman needed to hire an arsonist, so he hired this guy. And after he successfully did a job, he asked the guy, "Do you want the ability to manipulate fire?" And the guy said, "That can't be done, but if it could, that would be awesome," because he loves fire. And so the businessman tells him, "I can give you that power." And so he gets it. And 15 years later, the guy was in his 20s. Now the guy is about 30, 35, 36. Is now the head of security for the businessman, and his basically his most faithful employee. That's what I have so far. I have more villains, but most of which are either very, very late villains that I'm still working on, story-wise, like, or they're teams of ideas that I'm coming up with. But I do have ideas, and I do have other villains I'm working with. Please leave a comment or a video response. Tell me what you think. Tell me what doesn't work for you. Tell me what does work for you. And yeah, if I can ever find an artist, I'm not looking for one right now. I'm just trying to get my idea out. Trying to tell people, please give me creative criticism. Give me or whatever the word I'm looking for. Yeah, give me helpful criticism. I don't care if you tell me my idea sucks. If you tell me why my idea sucks, it's fine. My heroes might be a little generic, but yeah. This is Goku Photo Sub 1, and I'll see you next time. YouTube.